Used to, right? It did. It started telling you that things are recording.
Yeah, I felt like that was a newer update. It startled me the first time.
Me too. Zoom has been making all kinds of changes. Thanks to those of you for joining us. We're going to get started in just a couple of moments. And as you can see, we are starting to record this meeting and stream live on social media. So we will go ahead and get started in just a couple of moments, just to give everybody a chance to get settled in. On the screen is showing how you can change your screen name to reflect your affiliation. We love it when you do that. It really helps us keep track of who's on the line. It's especially important for those of you that are part of the resident stipend program. So we do hope that you participate in that naming convention. And also, we are potentially voting this evening. And so we want to make sure that everyone who is eligible to vote has that ability, and we can tell really quickly and easily during that process. So thanks again for that participation and your cooperation with that renaming and that screen change. And we'll get started in just a couple of seconds. Well, it looks like we've got a pretty good group here on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank you for joining us tonight, and for certainly, you know, there's lots of things you could be doing with your Wednesday evening, right? And it's really important, and we want to acknowledge that you're here with this AB 617 steering committee. My name is Erica Manuel. I'm the CEO of the nonprofit organization called ILG, and I am so happy to lead the facilitation team for AB 617, along with my team members, Hannah and Julia. Hannah, you know really well. Julia is brand new to our organization. She's new to this meeting, but she's waving right now, and you may or may not hear from her later today. And we're happy to help you with any problems that we have throughout the meeting. We are very committed to having that inclusive process throughout the evening, and so I want to make sure that Douglas is on the line, and if so, that he's connected to his interpretation. Is everything working properly with that system?
I don't believe we have Douglas just yet. The interpreter is standing by.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. So when Douglas joins, we might stop the meeting for just a couple of moments if we need to connect him and pin him to his interpreter. So we graciously thank you in advance if that needs to happen. But again, we're committed to an inclusive process, and we do that with sign language interpretation. And we also have Spanish language interpretation available if anyone ever needs that. That's certainly something that can be requested. Next slide, please. So we've had numerous Zoom meetings, so we're going to dispense with a majority of the Zoom logistics for the sake of time this evening. But we do want to put up some Zoom reminders to kind of refresh your memory. A couple big things to remember. To please make sure that your screen name is accurate, and on that slide right now is showing you how to make sure your screen name is accurate. Again, we are happy to rename you manually if you'd like. All you need to do is unmute your phone, or you can raise your Zoom hand. If you are in the stipend program, you'll need to stay in this meeting for 75% of the time to get credit for the meeting. And again, you might have heard that little announcement and seen a little pop-up on your screen, but this meeting is being recorded and there will be public comments at the end. And we want to make sure that we leave enough time in our agenda so that public comments are reflected as well. These CSC meetings are always open to the public. We're grateful to the public members, and we want to make sure that they have an opportunity to participate. There's a couple ways you can do that if you're listening to us on YouTube or streaming us through Facebook. You can go to any one of those pages and type comments into one of those pages, Facebook or YouTube. You can also submit your questions to ab617@valleyair.org during the meeting. We will, anytime, and we will address those comments during the public comment portion at the end of the meeting. So know that you can comment at any time via those channels, and then we will address them at the very end, and we do appreciate your participation in that. So before we move to the larger portion of the agenda, I want to ask if there are any participants that are logging in by phone or on tablet, can't rename themselves, that we need to rename today for attendance purposes. I'll ask Julia or Hannah, is there anyone that needs to be renamed?
Taking a look now here if there's anyone that has not renamed themselves. Sandy Pabin, I don't see any affiliation there. If you want to add.
Oh, hello, Sandy. If you can add your affiliation, we would love that.
And the rest are good, Erica. We got everyone renamed and identified.
Great, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So we do have a pretty full agenda tonight, and here to guide us through that agenda is your CSC colleague, Ed Ward, who is our community co-host. You probably all know him very well. So at this time, I'm going to just turn the mic over to Ed and then your Air District host for them to say a few words about this meeting before we talk about the agenda and the background.
Thank you, Erica. It's truly a pleasure and a humbling for me to be able to work with you guys. Tonight, we have some specific items on the agenda that we're going to cover, and I want to go over them fairly quickly. We're going to, right at the end of Ryan's discussion, we're going to do an icebreaker, which is very valuable because it gives us all, it lets us all learn about some other people, and I found it to be really valuable last meeting. Next, we're going to go and review and adopt the charter amendments. All of the amendments that this group has brought to the table should be or are in the charter amendments. We want to try to keep that to 30 minutes if we can. At the end of that, we want to have a vote. If it looks like the charter doesn't reflect what we believe is important, then what we can do is push it off to next meeting and try to get it corrected and then forward it out to the group again. When that portion is done, we're hoping to review the summary of the prioritizations for our CERP measures. Very interesting documentation. I don't think it'll take too long. It's had pretty thorough vetting with everyone, but we'll be going over it. And then the piece that I think is really important this evening, and I'm hoping that the most of our time will be able to be spent on implementation of the CERP measures. There's going to be a presentation regarding that, exactly how those silos work and how that whole process is going to work. I'm not sure silos is the right term. And then in that, we're going to start and begin to talk about subcommittees and how we can begin to take action and see some of these initiatives that we've discussed, prioritized, and agreed upon, how we can move them forward. So, and then we'll, when we finish that, we'll have a standing committees update with the air monitoring and with Carb, and then we'll wrap it up. And I'm looking forward to it. I again, welcome to everyone and thank you for taking the time. It is a significant amount of time for a very important subject. So I'll turn it to Ryan. You good?
You did a fantastic job, Ed, and just want to welcome everybody tonight, and good to see all of you, and look forward to another packed meeting full of good information sharing and work together. So I'll let it transition it off so we can start that work. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Well, thanks to both of you. Ed just walked you through the agenda, which is really pretty straightforward, but we'll go ahead and show the slides so you can kind of see the approximate times for that agenda. And the key here is that, oh, there we go. The key here is that we are looking for about a 2-hour meeting today, where we're going to really kind of do as much as we can within the timeframes allocated. But again, the key here is that this is your meeting, this is your timelines and your discussion. And as Ed mentioned, we want to make sure that we accomplish as much as possible while still honoring the spirit of the discussion.
Erica.
So I'm going to be asking, yeah.
I'm sorry, there was one thing that we talked about that I wanted to also say, and that's that if we come to a place where we don't find that we're in reasonable agreement, we're going to take that information down and it'll be moved to the next meeting. So I just want nothing that is discussed or needs additional discussion can't be accomplished. So I want to assure everyone of that as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. So ILG will be the neutral facilitator. We'll be working with Ed tonight to document and facilitate the conversation. And as Ed mentioned, and as we discussed in some previous meetings, we're going to take some real-time notes tonight and then share those at the end of the meeting to make sure that it reflects some of the discussion, the dialogue, and the intent of the conversation. And we mostly have three goals today. One, we want to make sure that all the community voices are heard. They're incorporated into the record. And every meeting, we try and make sure that even the divergent voices, right, maybe the minority voices are heard and opinions are shared. So feel free to speak up. Even if you have a dissenting opinion, we'd love to hear that. We love to make sure that it's reflected in this recording, reflected in the minutes, and shared. Even if there isn't full consensus on those ideas, we still like to hear them. Second, we like to try and start and end the meeting on time. Part of that is designed to make sure that we respect the schedules of the presenters, the interpreters, and the other attendees. And so, as Ed mentioned, we will continue to flag and modify this agenda as needed real time to make sure that we cover what you want to cover. The other thing that's important to do is honor and value meaningful discussion. So we're going to work with each of you to figure out, and the co-host, as Ed mentioned, to figure out what you want to cover, how much you want to cover, and if anything needs to move to another agenda item in the future, we certainly can do that. The last thing that we like to do is make sure that our tone remains productive and respectful. The slide that's showing right now is just some tips for sharing this virtual space. You've seen those before. This is a list of considerations and reminders about how we can interact in a Zoom environment. It's virtual, it's not as personal as it should be, but we do try. And so we hope that you will consider speaking up, that you will consider keeping your camera on if you can, if your background is safe enough for us, and then focusing that chat dialogue on the comments that we're and the topics that we're discussing right now. And then as your facilitator, again, I always commit to honor your experiences. I want to make sure that you feel comfortable discussing your issues and making sure that we can talk about harm, we can talk about trauma, we can talk about what this air quality project and this program means to you. And so I want to ensure that we center those shared values and those shared goals so we can reach the consensus whenever possible and as much as possible. And if we can't, we have a really productive conversation. Next slide, please. You've seen these tips before, tips for sharing this personal space, really just discussion, a meaningful discussion and a respectful dialogue. I won't read them, but we will try to honor them. And we certainly appreciate all of you and you committing your time to this and committing, your investment of not only your time, but also your talent and your treasure. All right, so now that we've given enough time for everyone to join and get settled, I'll ask to stop sharing the screen and see if there's any questions on the agenda before we dive into the icebreaker. If there's any questions, feel free to raise your hand or type it in the chat. It looks like Douglas is here now. Douglas, I want to make sure you get synced up with your interpreter. Are you doing okay with Mark?
Yes. Yeah, I see Mark interpreting right now. Thank you. Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Well, welcome. Happy to have you.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. Okay, so now we're going to move into the icebreaker. And as Ed mentioned, we have had a year. It's been almost 18 months of this Zoom craziness. And so, we know that we just can't replicate face-to-face interactions that we might have had or the relationships we might have built in the past 12 to 18 months. But it is still really important that we continue to prioritize those relationships and that engagement. And so, if you think about your SERP, you're going to learn about implementation today. You're going to learn about prioritizing measures, and you're going to be working with the people on this Zoom line for the next 5 years. And so we want you to understand each other's perspectives, each other's backgrounds, and your lived experiences so that you can share with each other, you can understand each other, and you can find that common ground. So we're going to start today with a breakout session like we did last month, and it's just a little bit of an icebreaker. And so we're going to break all of the CSC members into breakout groups of 3 to 4 people each. And we're going to ask each of you to answer one question in the group. So in 2 to 3 minutes or less, we'd like for you to share your personal connection to AB 617 and air quality. Why are you passionate about this work? How does your volunteerism on this committee tie to your personal or your professional life? So we've allocated about 10 to 15 minutes for this breakout group, and you will be automatically assigned. And then once we open up the rooms, it's going to be similar to what we did last week. You're going to get a notification and then you just need to accept that room assignment and jump right in. And we did something similar in your CSC meeting last month, but if you have any questions or challenges or anything, let's stop the share, let's raise hands, and let's make sure that we get everybody's questions answered before we initiate that breakout group. Can you stop the share, please, Julia? And I see that Jeff has to leave a little early, no problem. Any questions about the breakout group, any challenges? We'll certainly make sure to make sure that our interpreter gets with Douglas. And then for those of you that aren't assigned, there's always some stragglers. If you're not with the CSC, but you'd like to jump into one of the rooms, I certainly think we have some flexibility. We'll be mindful of that. We'll check in with the Air District, but right now we're going to leave everybody that's not assigned into the main room. We'll just take a quick break while the CSC members get to know each other a little bit better. I don't see any questions, and again, we have done this before, so I am going to ask Hannah if we are ready for our breakouts.
Erica, yes, we are ready. I'm gonna send folks to the room. You guys gonna automatically go to the room, and there's an option to leave the room if for some reason you don't like your group. Come back to the main room. Otherwise, we will bring you back automatically at what time, Erica?
Come back at about 5:25, so about 10 minutes.
5:25. Okay, I'm sending all our CSC members to the breakout rooms. Here you go. Okay, everyone is in their rooms. We can post the slide that says CSC members are in the breakout sessions.
And then I will drop the questions directly in, and then we'll give a notification.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to take this opportunity to feed my dogs, so I'll be back.
Thinking we'd bring them back about 5:28, Hannah, and then we'll have about 2 minutes. So we might need to do a broadcast message of 60 seconds. What's the set on 60-second or 2-minute notification?
Yes.
Or is there one?
Yes, we can do 2 minutes. 5:26.
2 minutes? Okay.
Yes.
Perfection. Thank you.
Timer. 6.
I don't think we asked this time, but is there anybody that needed to be joined to a room that didn't get assigned? Doesn't look like it, but I want to make sure. Great. Just checking in, Hannah. Is it set for 2 minutes automatically at 28, or do we need to broadcast?
I'm gonna send a reminder in about 1 minute, and then after another minute, we're gonna automatically close the rooms, and it takes 1 minute for everyone to come back. Everyone is kicked out after the countdown starts at 1 minute.
Great, I'll let you handle. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, I just sent the message out, 2 minutes left, and I'm gonna close the rooms in about 1 minute. Okay, Eric, I'm gonna go ahead and close all the rooms and they will have 30 seconds, 60 seconds to come back. And we had 3 people per room, except one group had 4 people. The rest of the groups had 3 people per room.
Sounds good. And hopefully they all got through.
Right.
Oh, it looks like Jeff didn't join. Oh, because he had to leave early.
Can you put me back in my group real quick? I hit the wrong button.
Oh, we already closed all the rooms.
They're already coming back.
Oh, shoot.
They're all coming
Okay.
back.
I really, sorry, Leonard, I hit the wrong button. I was trying to, I wanted to hear your feedback.
Well, I appreciate all that you said, and it really means a lot to hear you say that you're working with people that want to make a difference and want to see things through and want to develop in the area that you're talking about around the port, because the port is such a big facility, and people look at it and they want to see great change come from it. But unfortunately, some haven't seen it. But just to know that you're working there and that you're trying to make things better, that's the main thing. So
it's happening. It's happening.
Okay.
Sorry, Florence. I didn't mean to leave earlier. I hit the wrong button. And if there's any feedback that you want to provide.
That's okay. It was just interesting, Jeff, to know that you were not from here, that you're from Southern Cal. And what I wanted to say was that, yeah, I understand the air quality down where you came from. You know, here in Northern California, especially in Stockton, there were days when you could see really clear from Mount Diablo to the Sierra Nevada in the past, real clear, like crystal clear. Those days tend to be very few and far between now, and it sure would be nice. It sure is nice when it does clear out with a good breeze or a good wind, and you actually see that again. It's spectacular.
Yeah. All right.
It sounds like you guys had a great conversation. I'm so glad that you were able to talk a little bit to each other, learn something about each other that you might not have known. It sounds like Jeff's group got to hear a few things they didn't know about him, and I hope you all experienced that as well. You know, we certainly don't have time to get a report out from every single breakout group, but if there is anybody that wants to give their own personal story, their own short version of that, we'd love to hear it. And if you'd like to raise your hand, I'll call on the first person that raises their hand to share their story or their passion or their personal professional connection to this work. It's okay if there is no one, but if there is someone, we'd love to give you that chance now. Mary Elizabeth, I see your hand.
Yeah, we talked about how scary it is when people are having breathing difficulties, and you know, particularly all of our young people. And you know, we live in a society where there's a lot of trauma, and you know, we kind of touched on, you know, how traumatic that is when you know, folks are having difficulties breathing.
Thanks for sharing that. And you're in the right place to make that kind of change. And I think a lot of people probably have that experience. Certainly, a number of communities are facing those challenges, and we appreciate you sharing that. All right, well, it is now 5:30, so it's time to move on to our next agenda item. Thank you all for just being so open and honest in your groups, we assume. We do want to make sure that you try and get to know one another and find those connections that you may have that you may not have known that you had, because it does really help as you build community within this tiny little group and as you find common ground and as you work on your SERP implementation over the next 5 incredible years. So the next item on our agenda is to review and discuss the amendments that we have been making to the charter. At the last meeting, if you recall, we got a lot of really great suggestions from this team about some adjustments and some refinements that could be maybe clarified or added to the language to reflect the natural evolution of this CSC and how you really like it to run moving forward. And so I want to turn things over to Ed and then Jess to walk you through what's been done and what maybe is the next step for this. So I'll hand it over to those two and you'll hear back from me later.
Thank you, Erica. As I talked about at the opening, All of this information is been gathered from previous input. There were a couple of items that were not a part of this, but they didn't appear to feel like they should be part of the charter. But regardless, we'll come back to those if those are significant issues. This has already been cooked, and I'm hoping that we can move through it fairly quickly because we'd like to have a vote regarding it. It doesn't have to be a perfect document. It just needs to be a document that we pretty much agree with, and we can continue to change it as we move forward or make any changes that are necessary. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. And thank you all again for all of the great feedback. I think we can all agree that I thought the last meeting was a really good sort of example of how we can all sort of work together and work with our facilitators to take great notes and provide the district with feedback, and then have that sort of closure of the loop where we get you back what we've heard, and hopefully today close that loop and see if this is reflective of what everyone was intending when they provided those comments. And so without further ado, I'm just going to high level go over the highlighted portions or anything that's changed or been added. And then I will give it back to Erica and Ed to talk through just any questions or concerns before there's a discussion about sort of finalizing or approving this, if that's what the committee chooses to do.
Hey, Jess, could you do a favor and zoom way in just to make sure everybody can see it? Thank you.
Is this better?
Yes, that's better right there. I think if anybody has any visual issues with that, just raise your Zoom hand or note in the chat and we'll make it bigger.
Yes, and let me know because it's hard when sharing to see Zoom hands and votes. So please just let me know. Like I said, I'm going to go over it and then we can go back to the pieces, but just to give those that haven't had a chance to review. So the first section that had some changes was just clarification. And you'll notice a lot of this was more clarification than anything to a lot of the great suggestions that you all mentioned. And the first is here in member participation and just clarifying that the designated alternate on the steering committee roster may attend in the absence of their primary member and deliberate. And then the section that changed was including any action needed during decision-making agenda items. And that's just to clarify, since there were some voting clarifications later on in the charter, to clarify the role of the official designated alternate as also an official designated voting alternate for voting members of the CSC. Further down, there was sort of based on a lot of great feedback. And of course, this is something, as a lot of you know, we've already been doing, but there was a lot of great feedback about making sure it was in the charter. And so this section here under co-leads and co-hosts says to the maximum extent possible, the week after the monthly CSC meeting, co-leads and interested steering committee members will meet with the Valley Air District and meeting facilitators to discuss action items and prepare agenda for the following CSC meetings. So this is something we've already implemented, but was certainly a comment that we wanted to make sure was captured here as one of the main roles of being a co-lead and a co-host, and really a role for the district to make sure we adhere to as well. We mentioned that there was some interest and something that hopefully we're implementing, I think we're implementing today, and you will see that at the end, was there were comments about making sure that we have transparency and accountability with some action items and some of the notes that come out of the meetings, as opposed to just having the facilitators say that they're taking notes. Then they will actually show the notes sort of at the end. And this is really something that's generally reflected when we meet in person. We would be writing them like on a whiteboard or on a big sticky note. So this is really kind of closing the loop in this virtual environment. Whether it's virtual or notes, we would make them clearly visible at the end of the meeting so that there's some transparency on what the next steps are for the district, for the facilitators, or for the committee. This is where a lot of the great feedback came through. So you'll see a lot of different changes here, but just to kind of go over, I won't read them individually, but I'll just tell you The consensus piece, all we did here was change, I believe, the word mass majority, just to kind of explain a little bit more of the consensus building process. But of course, as is noted here in the charter and was already in the charter, we understand that achieving consensus might not always be possible. And so clarifying what the majority vote meant. And so we clarify here that the majority vote is 50% plus one of all steering committee members present at the time of the vote, or as noted earlier in the charter, designated alternates in attendance in absence of the primary member. So that's again of voting members. So that's one clarification that was requested. And then right here, a committee member may not vote on a matter if it is foreseeable that the outcome of the decision will have a direct financial impact on the member's personal finances or other financial interests. So as you might have heard, and I think a fair few number of people noted in our discussion last month, there were some interests in making sure that conflicts of interest were addressed when it came to voting matters on the CSC. So that is the piece of the charter that sort of acknowledges that. And Douglas, if I can keep going through this, or was it something unrelated to this piece and it's just a general, is it okay if I finish?
Well, I just gotta tell you to slow down a little bit, because
yes, sorry.
No, please. I just want to let you know that he's getting too fast with the blurry. So I just want to let you know. But I have a question before, and then I'll let you go. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate the reminder, and I will do my best to slow down my traditionally very quick pace. So, and then just one more thing, I think this was probably the comment we heard the most, and I think it was reflective of some of those last few meetings before we adopted the CERC. So we made sure to make it its own actually little sort of clause here. Agenda items possibly requiring action to be taken, so that's sort of like a voting action or a consensus building action, will be clearly identified on the CSC meeting agendas, and you saw that hopefully in this agenda item, and shall be discussed and considered by the CSC during the scheduled meeting times listed on the meeting agenda. And so that means that the not only the scheduled meeting times, meaning we won't bring up a vote at the end of the meeting at 7 p.m. if it's meant to end at 7, but also barring any sort of change during the committee meeting requested by committee members to move agenda items around, we will take the vote during that agenda item. Again, unless it's otherwise requested by the steering committee to move that. So that's something to make sure that people are present and aware that a vote is coming up. And then a couple of last ones here. Meeting summaries posted to the district's website will be translated and available in additional languages upon request. And I think we've already noted from several of you that there are folks that, although they are not on the committee requiring Spanish, for example, they have requested to understand what has happened at these committee meetings. And so making sure that if that additional language is requested, we will be able to translate it again in Spanish as the prime example here that has already been requested. And then just this was some clarity that was requested. So we wanted to make sure that we clarified that the districts should be the primary party responsible for dissemination, so sending out of materials to the entire CSC, so that we just make sure that it's the most up-to-date roster and contact information, so that folks know that so folks don't miss others if they're trying to get something to the entire committee and someone gets left off. And then all materials shall adhere to Section 4 of the Charter, which is that accessibility accommodation, which really is mostly in this case, at least when it comes to materials, really includes availability in other languages. And then this is just something that we've had in other charters. If translation is requested, then of course we would at the very least request that the people providing it be the primary party responsible for translation. But of course we can always discuss when it comes to materials between us and folks on the steering committee, how that material gets shared with the group. And then that's it. The rest of this was as has already been shared with the committee and that all of you signed, which is the participation agreement that was in the original charter. So I will go to the top and I will pass it back to Erica. Erica, let me know if you want me to stop sharing or share however you think it works best to walk through this discussion.
let's go ahead and have you continue sharing for now. What I will ask the committee is if there's anything that you've heard that is missing that needs to be included. Is there anything that's misrepresented? Is there any questions, right? And I think we've got a couple. Douglas had a couple, and I think Ned did as well.
If I can also just really quickly, you reminded me, there were two main things that were also shared that aren't in here that I wanted to clarify. One was that we thought, and this was an awesome idea, and we want to continue with this idea. One idea was for a youth summit to like really bring up youth voices. That feels like just an awesome outreach suggestion, and not necessarily a chartered, like how the meetings are run suggestion. So the thought was that we don't include it in the charter, but that's something we should totally continue to talk about as sort of an outreach mechanism, and thought that was actually a really great suggestion. And then the other was sort of adding a lot of specifics about subcommittees. As you'll see later in the agenda, the subcommittees are going to kind of be flexible and ebb and flow. It might depend on the type of committee. It might depend on the measure that we're talking about. And so instead of, there's already a piece about just, we can have subcommittee meetings. And so instead of chartering and making like really specific examples of what subcommittees look like in here, just leaving that open and flexible and not having it in the charter was just sort of the thought there. Okay, now I'll stop talking and let you facilitate.
No worries. So she did speak to the two things that were not included in the justification for that. So barring that, is there anything that you have questions about? Is there anything missing? Is there anything misrepresented? And I know that Douglas had his hand up first, then I'll go to Ned, and then I see Catherine.
Yes, that was good presentation. I misunderstand what you're saying about absentee. You say chronic absentee will not be voted, because if they have a lot of people are withdrawing from the meeting, how are you gonna make it 50-1 if people are losing interest that way? So are you gonna make a somewhere? Did it have to be all at once to vote, or are you gonna go and stand like an app to vote or whatever you want to vote on the criteria, and you get the 50 majority vote from email, whatever? How that's gonna, just for future reference, because a lot of people don't show for any preparing reason. You don't know why. So I think so. If any further delay, so just have an email and then just voted, and then when we get the, and then we announce what passed, whatever.
Right. Yeah. So we, based on at least the way that your charter is written, it's asking for people to be participatory in the CSC meetings. And so I think that's reflected in the concept of an alternate. So instead of having like an absentee vote where you like submit your vote in a ballot, I mean, at least this is the way that it's written. The idea would be that if you have a designated alternate that's applied through and is part of the alternate process that's already been in the charter, then that person can vote, if there is a vote on the agenda and that you are an eligible voting member. But it wouldn't be.
But what if the person that is absentee forgot about, just didn't like it disappear or didn't do it? So your alternative may not be not knowing what's going on for the half of the 2 years that we've been through, and you're voting something that an alternative have not been able to participate. So how would they be correctly educated in voting something that an alternative will not vote on? You know what I mean? Go ahead.
Yeah, so, and we do, this has actually already been in the charter, that the primary member, if you do have an alternate and you do foresee an example of a time when you might not make meetings, that's where the primary is actually responsible for working with the district to make sure and that they're informed and that they can maybe watch the YouTube videos or keep themselves abreast of what's going on. Because, I think everyone agrees that we don't want people who haven't been a part of this process suddenly coming in and voting on things. And but to your point, hopefully some of the things like keeping the meetings at the same time, same week, same day, every month helps people not forget about them, and we'll make sure that people are aware, when there is a voting item on the agenda. I think hopefully that helped clarify whether or not people should attend meetings. We flagged it this time. We talked about it at the beginning of the meeting and made sure that it was clear. So hopefully that helps clarify.
Okay, if that didn't answer your question, Douglas, feel free to raise your hand again. Perfect. I see Ned and then Catherine and then Taylor.
Yeah, thank you very much. My profound concern has to do with agenda setting. Agenda setting, if you take a look at page 3, you'll see it's a pretty amorphous process, and I'm quite concerned about that. So in every organization, deliberative organization that wasn't very large, there would be in the bylaws or the charter a provision that any 2 members could bring a matter to be placed on the agenda. And that has not happened, is not happening in this organization, which is very distressing to me. Now, sometimes you can have an informal way of putting matters on the agenda, even though you may have that written in the bylaws. But having that written in the bylaws is a bit of a hammer to make sure that we're not overlooking anything. And to give you an example from another very relevant organization, the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District, the Citizens Advisory Committee. I sent an email to the chair and I said, gee, we need to have a presentation from the scientific people at Carb. And the chair was able to bring in, and we had a session where we had actually John DeMassa, who's the chief scientist of Carb. He talked about all sorts of studies that cost millions of dollars that was charged to our air district, but not one health study. And he said in response to my question, we are prohibited from undertaking health studies. Now, that's one example of where that's a pretty important matter for air pollution, where one person maybe with another sends an email and something gets on the agenda and we're all informed of something pretty dramatic. Now, I've been sending letters and emails since last year asking for cost benefit in health studies and discussions. And I get a response that it's coming, but it has not come. And now there seems to be a position of staff that we're not going to do anything. Look, that should be on the agenda. It should have been on the agenda. I attended that agenda setting meeting, was it last week or the week before? I pointed this out. And the distinct feeling I got from staff is, no, staff is speaking, not the committee. We're not going to do it. And with all due respect, I said explicitly at that meeting, every organization that I have been involved with has a Robert's Rules of Order type of mechanism to set the agenda. But that has not been done in this case. And so we still don't have cost benefit health studies on the agenda, although in some sense it was promised. And even at that last agenda setting meeting, I detected a tremendous amount of resistance to putting it on an agenda and taking a look at it. And then our charter, our bylaws don't have a mechanism for interested people to get that on the agenda. I think that is a terrible problem here, and it has to be remedied. And I think, look, the work of the committee is not going to have value without looking at some of these issues. By trying to silence me or trying to silence looking at these very important issues, you're doing a disservice to the committee and what we're after, which is to bring about improvement in health outcomes. Improvement in health outcomes for people in our area. And when you won't put things like this on the agenda, it is defeating the purpose of the committee. At the very least, you must have an agenda setting mechanism that will allow these important topics to be brought formally to these committee meetings.
Thank you for that comment, Ned. And I want to go out of order, and I see Ryan's hand, and I think he may want to respond to that. So I just want to flag that, give you that opportunity, Ryan, if that was why your hand is up.
I can wait till after everybody.
Okay, great. Thanks for that comment, Ned. I did reflect it in my notes, reflecting the charter conversation. Catherine Garupa-White.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thanks for all of the work that everyone has put into improving this document. I have two areas where I would ask for additional clarity. The first one being the change regarding recusal, where it says may not vote on decisions with a potential foreseeable financial stake. To me, that's still vague what that actually means. And I saw from Nate in the chat that he agreed with transparency in writing before major discussion and votes. So I would like more clarity on specifically what the recusal process looks like. Are we just counting on people to recuse themselves? Are they filling out forms beforehand and disclosing financial interests? Or what exactly does that look like? The second piece is around how voting happens and how a majority is established. As Douglas was noting, there's potential as time goes on that participation is going to drop. And so hopefully we would never find ourselves in this scenario. But in theory, the way the charter is written right now, if we have 5 voting CSC members and 5 present and 3 vote yes, then that decision would move forward. So I do have some suggested language that I'm going to drop into the chat that's about establishing a quorum before you can use the 50% +1 majority in order to vote, or some other kind of threshold of a minimum number of voting CSC members that need to be present before you can utilize 50% +1. Again, mainly to just ensure that we have robust representation when we're making key decisions. So those would be my 2 requests for clarification.
Thank you, Catherine. I see next Taylor, and then Matt, and then Ryan.
Thanks. My internet's been a bit spotty all day. Can you hear me okay? Cool. Yeah, well, first I want to just elevate what Ned said as well. Agree that like during agendizing meetings, I think that should be, should all be heard out in the same way. And especially in terms of like us on voting items, I think that we need to like be very aware of that. And regarding specifically around like health studies, I know that's hopefully something that we'll be addressing in our TAG subcommittee. So using experts, you know, inside of Carb, outside of Carb, like just having scientists like weigh in on cost benefit analysis and health studies, I do agree. And the other thing I'll say is I might push on the subcommittee a bit, and for this particular charter to say that like, I don't think we have to get to the level of detail of like we have like these 7 subcommittees that govern these particular things. I don't necessarily think that belongs in the charter, but as it stands, we're talking about setting up subcommittees tonight with 2 sentences in our charter about it. And I think that we could address that on a higher level, whether that's, you know, governance structure, roles and responsibilities. Ryan, in our last TAG subcommittee meeting, you mentioned that there would be individual technical advisors sitting on subcommittees in addition to a TAG subcommittee. Like, what is their role? So I think like drilling down some of the specifics of how subcommittees operate as a whole, I think is appropriate for this document. So I would like to push on that a bit. And the last thing I'll say is I saw the term advance notice 1 or a few times on this, and I think that we should get a bit more specific about. It was largely, I think, pertaining to dissemination of materials. So a few months ago, I think towards the beginning of this year, we named like a 72-hour timeline for distributing materials, whatever it was. I think we should be a little more specific about the notice that we give for prep materials. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments, and I have made notes reflecting that. I also see, Matt, and then Ryan, and then I thought I saw Ed, but we'll close it out with Ed. Matt, you're up.
Yeah, I'm going to withdraw my request. Taylor, Catherine, and Ned covered my issues. You know, agendizing is important. Specifics around the subcommittee role is super important. And then, you know, the Robert's Rule of Order thing, not everything can make it into an agenda. I just worried about the language where if something hasn't been put in a formal agenda, we're like not allowed to discuss it. Motions, seconds, and voting are acceptable for a whole host of decisive actions. it's actually, it's in other charters. So I think that's something that we can let go of and make a part of our process. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. So if I want to clarify, I think you said you're leery about full Robert's Rules of Orders, but you think that a motion and a second could be good for potentially, addressing items that need to be addressed that are or are not on the agenda.
Yeah, correct. Well, no, I think we need Robert's Rules of Order. I think whatever made it into this agenda, if somebody didn't participate in the agenda setting meeting, they should be able to highlight an issue, and they should be able to get the support of their peers on the CSC to broach an issue. And that if it didn't make it into the published agenda, this is a screenshot of a meeting that happened a little over a week ago, and things can change. So I think anybody should be able to bring up an agenda issue at any time, or ask to discuss it later, or table it, or whatever. But I feel like when I read in the section about voting, I'm sorry, I could go to my own screen.
No, it's okay.
Agenda items possibly requiring will be clearly identified. Everybody on here, I hope we're all just paying attention. Somebody should be able to bring up a new issue is my sole point, and Robert's Rules of Order covers that ritual.
I think just to clarify, this wasn't added based on at least our interpretation of the feedback that we received about making sure that people knew that a vote might take place, so they knew that the meeting, to Doug's point, perhaps maybe people were busy or wanted to know sort of what was happening in that meeting, and some people felt like they didn't know whether or not a vote was going to happen, and so that was the reason for this. And so just to clarify, Matt, are you saying that folks maybe should be able to vote on items even if they're not clearly identified on the agenda as voting items?
I think, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I think everybody on here that has a voting role, we kind of owe it to each other to attend to the moment at hand and track the conversation and participate to the best of your ability. And if it's okay to absent yourself if you're not tracking an issue, but that shouldn't mean that this meeting can't be effective on an issue as it comes up.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think, well, I'll just let others comment. Sorry.
Excellent. I see Ryan, Delby, and Ed. And I do want to acknowledge that we're at the time allocated for this discussion item. So I'm definitely going to look to Ed for how we want to adjust the time today. But I'm going to go to Ryan and then Delby, and then Ed can give us some direction on how I'd like to move forward.
I'll let Delby go first, if that's all right.
Great.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'll try to be brief. Ned, I just want to go back to your point, and I just want to apologize if you felt that you were not adequately heard at the agenda setting meeting. I guess what I was trying to do in that conversation back then was really try to get the sense of the group as to whether or not there was agreement with established science that PM 2.5 is in fact dangerous at certain levels. There are in fact so many health studies, and they're actually relied on by US EPA in the form of the integrated science assessment to justify existing standards. So I think the question you were posing was a study on health that was attempting to sort of question that, versus perhaps what some others might think is coming into play when they think about a health study, which might be, a whole different category of things. And I agree there should be some conversation on that, but I just wanted to point out that, it's established by science based on health studies why it is that we have standards for PM 2.5, and the strategies that are in the SERP are meant to address that.
Thank you, Delby. Ryan, you want to go next? I do see Ned's hand. I think he's probably trying to reply to Delby.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm all right with deferring to Ned.
All right, Ned, if you'd like to reply to Delby's comment, please feel free.
Yeah, I think Delby, with all due respect, probably shouldn't bring that up. Look, she made the provocative statement, everyone here agrees that PM 2.5 is an extremely dangerous pollutant. And I testified, and I have submissions to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee. It's a matter of the public record. It's coming mostly from Carb and San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District information. And it's very hard. It is not possible to show that at 18 micrograms per meter cubed, going down to 16 micrograms per meter cubed in the ambient air, that it poses a significant health problem. And I can talk for an hour on that subject, but I think it's very, very disrespectful to suggest that my beliefs, which are based on looking at the best studies I can find, are not without cogency. You can take a look at the National Association of Scholars and Stan Young, who I know, who just released another study on what is flawed about these epidemiological studies. If Carb was really interested, they could have animal studies to show what the difference is between 18 micrograms versus 16 micrograms versus 12 micrograms. You have human studies that show no effect at all. You have these very messy epidemiological studies. I encourage everyone, go take a look at the Pfizer study, the double-blind randomized study that showed that the Pfizer vaccine was safe and effective. And you show me any of that in this literature, it's very messy. My point wasn't to go by that. My point was to put monitors around Boggs Tract, outside, inside, measure the exposure. Emissions aren't important. Exposure is what's important. And then track the health of, in terms of asthma, because asthma has gone up even though all the criterion pollutants have come down dramatically. So Deldy, I don't think you should bring up that subject. I think what we should focus on is if we genuinely want to improve the health and the welfare of people in Boggs Tract, you put out some monitors to see what could be causing the spike in asthma.
And Ned, I want to thank you for that comment. I do also want to give Delby a chance to reply to it, and then I'm going to ask that we move on from this topic, not because it's not important, but because it's not related to the charter at the moment.
I don't think she should have brought it up, to be quite honest with you. I don't think she should have made the statement at the agenda setting meeting, and I don't think it's really that relevant now. But I just don't like the disrespect, because I've read a lot, I've thought a lot, and I will talk to anyone about those subjects.
Ned, and one of the issues is that not everybody's at the same level that you are of understanding of air pollutants. And one of the best things you could do is help bring everybody forward as we do move forward. But those studies are long-term studies that are, and actually some of them I would argue have been done through OEA, who's already set certain standards for exposure to different chemicals and toxics. So Ned, your comments are right on. The problem is you've got to bring everybody on board, and I hope you'll understand that as we move forward.
And where I take you to task, quite honestly, is when I said to you in that meeting, you should have a mechanism so that items could get on the agenda. That's the more important point of this conversation, is you have to have a mechanism. If I have 2 or 3 people say, let's put this on the agenda, that it be put on the agenda and not blown off.
Yeah, well, I did make a note of that, Ned.
Put a mechanism in the charter like you have with any bylaws and any charter that says 2 members can bring something to be placed on the agenda. Usually it's negotiated. I shouldn't have to pound so hard on this.
Hey Ned, don't you think that part of that mechanism is the fact that Erica is actually taking notes? We're going to bring this stuff back, and we're going to figure out at the next meeting that we determine what the agenda is going to be. Is this going to be a voting item or not a voting item? Ned, maybe we missed the mark on the last meeting, but we're trying to fill in the gaps right now.
This document should have a mechanism for setting an agenda that is consistent with 2 people or 3 people saying, we want this on the agenda, and eventually, if not on this one, it's on the next one. It should be part of your bylaws, part of your charter.
Thanks for that comment, Ned. I did put that note in the charter notes, so just know that it is reflected, and I think we're likely moving towards some additional adjustments to the charter, and so that conversation, I think, this is the time for that, and we'll certainly send that to the Air District to incorporate as needed. With that in mind, I see Ryan and Ed, so we're going to go back. Ryan and then Ed, and then we're going to close out this item. And I want to thank Ned and I want to thank Deldy. And Deldy, I didn't give you a chance to respond, but I do want to make sure you have that opportunity. Certainly feel free to do that privately or raise your hand if you'd like to weigh in. Ryan, would you like to move forward?
Yeah. Well, I think I just want to speak to a few points on this topic. I think the concept of including some discussion about how things get added to the agenda it could go a long way to strengthening the charter. We can look to do that. In regards to some of the points about the district not wanting to or not being willing to provide data, I know Ned and I have had numerous conversations about this, and we've sent out different documents providing information, and that's done in basically trying to follow what the guidance that Carb has put out about the information that needs to be part of development of SERP measures and kind of the principles behind what gets funded through the community air protection incentive guidelines, which we're going to go through a presentation later that's going to hit more on those points. But in regards to studies and additional information, that's really what this AB 617 part of it is about. It's about the community air monitoring. That's part of the Stockton community. It's the community emission reduction program measures. And once we start implementing these measures, we start getting the emission reductions. This data hopefully will be used for those studies that Ned is speaking to and talking about, and will help inform additional studies and research and decision making at a broader level, hopefully with the data that's captured through this process.
Thanks for that update and feedback, Ryan. And that was kind of, summary of kind of the air district's position on some of this. I do want to acknowledge two things. One, we're a little bit over time, which isn't necessarily bad, but I'm getting the sense, and I'm going to gauge this with Ed, that we don't have full consensus on exactly where the charter is right now. It looks like there's some additional edits that might be needed before we approve the amendments in a fell swoop. So Ed, do you want to validate that with me? Is that your sense as well?
That would be my sense. I think that, we can bring it back and look at the additions that would be necessary and talk about that. I mean, there's items that many of us would agree with, and there's some items that many of us might not agree with. So it's as we move forward, it's everybody having a voice. And I don't think just one or two should have that voice. I think it needs to be a larger amount, but that's my personal opinion. I would say that we move on to the summary of the SERP measures and table this until next meeting.
Sounds good. In terms of process, I do want to acknowledge that you already have an existing charter. And so the conversation today was going to be about the amendments to the existing charter. So until you approve an updated charter, the old one will be in effect. And so that doesn't change too much dramatically, but certainly the charter is slightly different based on the conversations we've had today and the conversation we had last month and the proposed adjustments. So just know that we're operating under the original charter for now, and that we'll have additional conversations about how to refine the charter further. Before we move on, I do want to clarify and just not clarify, but summarize for you all, because we did make that promise, and I'll show all of this on the screen at the end of the meeting. We've had conversations about agenda setting process and clarifying how items on the agenda get added to the agenda, clarity on recusal language, specifically around that it's a little too vague. You might need specifics on that process, and if there are forms and other financial paperwork to kind of validate that conflict of interest. Voting and majority language may need to be added to establish a quorum before voting for a minimum number of CSC members. So you wouldn't want to have a small number of CSC members voting. You'd want to make sure that you have at least a quorum, and that should be established. And then the subcommittee language could be stronger to define the specifics of how subcommittees operate as a whole. And then we want to be more specific maybe about advance notice. The references in the charter just say advance notice, but they don't specify if it's 24, 48, or 72 hours or some other number. And then there is some agreement that any CSC member should be able to adjust and suggest an agenda item. We are moving on from this topic, so what I will request is if there's anything that I didn't reflect here, please drop it in the chat. I'll try and put it in the notes and send that to the Air District, and I'll certainly share it with you all at the end of this meeting as well. All right, so sorry, I muted myself. Moving on, I did want to thank you all for the really robust dialogue and acknowledge that there is a lot of important information in this charter, and it's good to take time, spend time on that document for governance. It's good. All right, so our next item is a CERT prioritization. And so as mentioned during the last meeting, you guys just reached this major milestone, right? A lot of you might still be wondering what we do next, how we move forward, how does this all work? So this agenda item is to really talk about the results of that CERT prioritization exercise that we did at the last meeting, and how you're going to go about the implementation. So Jess and Ed, again, this dynamic duo, are going to talk through how this all works. Jess might start us off, and then Ed might kind of wrap it up, and then we'll go into additional comments, and I'll be taking notes in the background.
Great. Thank you, Erica, and thank you all. I am dropping in the chat now something that was actually emailed to you, but you feel free to click and scroll along with me. I'm going to share my screen as well. And these are the results from those that participated in that survey. That was where you sorted, you had an opportunity to sort all the different SERP measures and sort of identify how we wanted to move forward. And so I'm actually here on the Stockton, the main CSC page, just so I can show you. I like kind of reminding folks that things don't just live in emails. We like to make sure that they get dropped and live on the website as well. So if you go to steering committee documents, it's actually the very first thing here. And we are in the process actually of making sure this is even more organized, so hopefully easier to find. So hopefully this is big enough, but like I said, I dropped it in the chat if you do have the ability to move along with us. But what I'm going to do now is just sort of show folks and maybe see maybe some reactions to those. Oh, Mary Elizabeth's question. Last I looked, I believe 12 people participated to answer Mary Elizabeth's question. And we made sure that it was folks, you know, we asked for names and made sure that no one voted twice and that sort of thing, in case anyone was wondering. So here is the Stockton CERT prioritization results. The first question, if you're following along, was just asking those to order the measure categories. So instead of the actual CERT measures themselves, more just high level categories. So we can just as a group understand sort of which main categories were the highest priorities for maybe more frequent discussions. This might help us develop subcommittees, or it might just help us develop agendas at those agenda setting meetings and really use this to sort of drive the agendas as we move forward. So definitely take a look here, but it's heavy duty measures, and that's really the incentives based and partnership based measures. Stationary source regulatory measures was second. Community incentives measures, so that was lawn equipment, fireplaces, vegetative barriers. Outreach, which are things like air quality education or incentives outreach, so letting people know essentially about 8617 opportunities. Mobile source regulatory measures, so those are more like the Carb side of things. So what Carb
you aren't sharing your screen.
I'm not.
I can see it.
I see it.
Sorry, Mary Elizabeth. I think I'm sharing it. Let me know if there. Please make it large. Is it not large enough too? Hopefully we can all. If you, Mary Elizabeth, if you want to follow along in that link, that might help. I'm just scrolling down, and I don't want to. You know, I think a lot of you are able to read this hopefully, so I don't want to take up too much time by reading. But
I do want to request to make the screen a little larger though, so if we can make it a bit larger, that might be.
Is this big enough? This is.
If that's better, great. If it's not, let us know. We'll keep making it bigger. I don't know if you can make it any bigger, but
I think it can
we are trying to accommodate.
Well, hopefully me dropping it in the chat helps a little bit, and let me know if that doesn't help. But ultimately, I just kind of wanted to scroll down. It's kind of hard when it's this big to see them all in order. But here, this on the left-hand side, this is the community category. So you can just sort of see here, urban greening, vegetative barriers. We have our air filtration, kind of down at the bottom were the lawn and garden measures. To the right, where heavy duty truck rerouting we heard was a really high priority. Moving down through the enforcement was actually next. So anti-idling enforcement, replacement of heavy duty trucks, switcher locomotives, charging infrastructure, plugs, and school buses. Passenger vehicles, so those are things that are, cars that are on the road. The first one being training for EV mechanics, all the way down to our car share program. For stationary source measures, the enhanced inspection frequency enforcement was the number one. Evaluation of rules was number 2, and then expedited facility risk assessment was number 3. Land use, integration of local and regional planning efforts, support for projects that reduce vehicle miles traveled, enhanced enforcement, again, in this case, dust requirements, address algal blooms, and bike paths and infrastructure were sort of rounded out the bottom 3 here. And then finally, outreach, just kind of what was the most meaningful piece of outreach that we wanted to really make sure we touched base with the community on, and the committee had a lot of input in more frequently. That would be multilingual community air quality outreach, all the way down to outreach to reduce illegal burning. So one thing I just kind of want to point out here before we kind of talk about next steps, as you're looking through this, something to keep in mind, these are weighted, meaning everyone obviously got a chance to order them on their own. So really the closer to one and the bigger difference between each measure here just means that more people ranked this particularly higher. So down here, when you see that they're kind of tied, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is 3 and this is 4. They probably, it looks like with them being kind of the same score, that they could have gone either way. And then things that are, you can see up here, things that are really close together, it looks like it was, could have gone either way. Some people might have just had them switch. Whereas as you move up closer, it's pretty obvious that the truck rerouting study was in a lot of people's top priorities within this particular category. So that's just kind of a way for you to keep looking and keep understanding at least this initial cut of what everyone's priorities were. And so what we want to do now is maybe I'll kick it over to Ed to sort of talk about kind of what our next steps are for the rest of the meeting. But all of this is really going to drive the starting point for how we work together as a committee. And you saw on the agenda, we're going to talk about next steps for a lot of course, the incentives measures, I think is a lot of what's on everyone's mind, as well as subcommittees and how we move those forward. So I'll kick it to Ed, and then we can move on to our incentives piece.
I want to thank everyone for their willingness to work through this. We are on a short time schedule, but this next issue that we're going to be discussing, the implementation of CERT measures, I believe Jessica is going to do a presentation. Is that correct? No.
It's going to be Todd.
Oh, Todd. Okay. Well, very good. I think this is where we begin to look at what do we need to do to get these SERPs, these ideas that we have out, and begin to see what it would take to fund them and to build the planning. And I appreciate everyone moving through the agenda this far to get us to this point. So on with the presentation.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Again, Todd DeYoung, the Director of Grants and Incentives here at the district. I'm going to share my screen and go through a presentation. So as we kind of move through the development.
I want to apologize to you for interrupting you, but I do see Mary Elizabeth's hand. I just wanted to acknowledge that maybe before you start, we give her a chance to ask her question if she has one or make a comment.
Yeah, I just had a question, so I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on this. The smaller the number on the survey results, the higher the priority.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Thank you, Mary.
That was a good question. Thank you.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see the PowerPoint up there? And so as we move through the development phase and into the implementation phase, this is where things get fun, and this is where a lot of the work in our area really comes into play. In terms of getting these programs up and running, developing certain procedural documents that are necessary to get these approved for funding. And so I'm going to kind of go through this process. We've talked about it in general terms, at other points during this process, but just wanted to kind of give everyone an update and kind of let you know what basically happens from here in terms of implementing the incentive strategies. There we go. And so the Air Resources Board has developed what they call the Community Air Protection Guidelines. That essentially is a blueprint for how the funding that is associated with AB 617 can be spent. It includes several chapters of what they call pre-approved project categories. This includes a lot of the heavy-duty equipment, traditional heavy-duty equipment projects. It includes school bus projects. It includes the school air filtration, which we'll get into in a little bit. But it also includes what they call Chapter 6. Now, Chapter 6 is really important in terms of the innovative types of projects that are included in the Stockton SERP. Anything that's not pre-approved in the CAP guidelines has to go through this process that's outlined in Chapter 6. And basically, Chapter 6 has some high-level guiding principles, and they're on the screen now, and they're represented with these bullets. Obviously, the programs have to reduce, or the general guiding principles is that the program should reduce emissions in the community. We should focus on funds. We should focus the funds on projects that reduce PM 2.5 and community-specific toxic air contaminants and other criteria air pollutants. That's one of those high-level guiding principles in the CAP guidelines. Obviously, you want community support. So the fact that these programs and these SERP measures were included in your SERP and they were voted on, shows that community support, and we'll continue as we work through the development process on all these. We'll continue to reinforce that community support and everything that we provide to Carb. And then as we move forward into the implementation, obviously we'll be working closely with the community. We consider special projects to protect sensitive receptors. There's a lot of school-focused programs that provide either emission reductions or exposure reductions to schools and to senior centers, and other sensitive receptors throughout the community should be prioritized. Cost effectiveness is a big one. Bang for your buck. How many tons of emission reductions can we get for every dollar that we spend in the community? That's certainly one of the guiding principles that we want to go by. And so as we talk about these community identified projects, these projects that are not necessarily spelled out in the CAP guidelines, there's some additional requirements. They have to be those projects that are selected by the communities and included in the SERPs. The Carb board has committed to an expedited and streamlined review and project plan analysis. So the Carb board has basically said, hey, these programs that the communities want, we want them done quickly, and we want the evaluation done quickly and thoroughly. So that was something that was put in there by the Carb board to ensure that these programs are successful. We need to quantify the emissions reductions or the exposure reduction benefits of each one of the project plans. If they're not necessarily quantifiable, for instance, like a truck rerouting study doesn't necessarily have emission reduction benefits directly associated with it, we have to evaluate those qualitative benefits based on the impacts to the environment, the local health concerns and impacts, and then other socioeconomic factors. So the Carb approval process, again, those project categories that are pre-approved, we can move forward with. We don't need to wait for any additional documentation or any additional program or project plan development. We can move forward with those types of projects immediately. That includes school bus replacement, the locomotive and switcher replacement, the public school air filtration program. Those are already pre-approved. So we can move forward with those, and we plan to move forward with those types of projects immediately. We can get a head start and jump on those. The other incentive measures that were included in your SERP must go through this approval process that I'm talking about. And what we have to do is we have to develop what's called a project plan and then submit that to Carb, and I'll go through a little bit about that in the next couple slides. So the project plan process is a measure by measure process where we have to basically identify what the project is, what all the benefits are, and then submit that to Carb and work with Carb on getting that approved for funding. There's a lot of back and forth. We've done several of these. In fact, we're one of the only air districts in the state that has actually gone through this process with Carb, and we have multiple project plans approved. Carb provides a lot of comments back to us along the way. We submit the initial project plan. There are a lot of different areas and a lot of different places in Carb that have to kind of look at these depending on what type of projects that we're looking at. But in essence, they have 60 days. They have 60 days once they have determined that the plan is complete. They have 60 days in which to approve that plan for funding and then get that approval back to the district. And so just, something that I heard earlier that was voiced as a concern, a potential concern, was that we wanted to make sure that to the extent possible, we weren't reinventing the wheel where we didn't have to. If other areas of the state or other communities, even within the Valley, AB 617 communities in the Valley, have a similar SERP project plan or a similar SERP measure, we're going to utilize what's already been done in those communities. We're going to look at what those communities have done or what those other air districts have done in those areas for a similar type of a project. And to the extent that we can, we're going to leverage that information to make our process even more streamlined as we take these to Carb for their approval. Unfortunately, the incentive measures that have no existing project plans, they may require a little bit of additional time to review because we're basically starting from scratch, and we and Carb are kind of going through this process together to learn about, how a successful project plan would look and how a successful program would operate. But so to the extent that we can, we're leveraging those opportunities where we have them. But in those cases where, the innovation from this group is, something that has never been proposed in any of the other communities, that's going to take maybe just a little bit more time to go through those processes. And so this is just a list of the funds or the measures broken down by which ones we can do now and which ones will require those project plans, those SERP project plans that I talked about. So like I said, we can do school bus replacement right now. It's already approved under the CAP guidelines, and we can move forward with those almost immediately. The rail car movers and switchers and short line locomotive replacement, again, it's a pre-approved category under the CAP guidelines, so we can move forward with those immediately. Air filtration in public schools is another one. And then, so the rest of this slide here and the next slide are measures that will need project plans approved by Carb. That includes the truck rerouting study, truck replacement, the charging infrastructure, plugins, the tune-in, tune-up. Even though a lot of these are existing district programs, they haven't yet been approved for funding under the CAP guidelines, so we have to take them through that process. The fact that a lot of these are existing district programs actually helps in that regard, because we don't necessarily, like I said, have to reinvent the wheel. We've got a lot of these questions already answered up front. So, and then again, this is just a continuation to show the projects categories, the SERP measures that will need those project plans developed before we can move forward with funding. That includes the car share program all the way down through the urban greening and vegetative barriers, while other communities have included a similar measure, and we can utilize a lot of the information from those previous measures. The implementation here in Stockton is tailored to Stockton, so there will be some very community specific information that has to go into that project plan. And that's really it. I'd be happy to take any questions and go from there.
Thanks so much, Todd. There are some good questions and dialogue happening in the chat, and I see 3 hands. In order, we've got Ned, Douglas, and Matt.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. Unfortunately, I guess my video doesn't work. You can't see me. Is that right?
We can't see you.
Well, that's because I was going to hold up metrics to track progress, page 177, and emission table 6-1, where we look at things like buses, electric buses, and the staff revised the table 6-1 a little bit. But what I find, and I was going to hold those up as an example of things that we should look at, because Todd said he's in charge of grants and incentives, that cost effectiveness is a very primary planning tool. We want to get the most bang for the buck. But we're going to move right ahead with the electric school bus proposal. That's HD7. Let's just pause for a second here. Yesterday, at the Citizens Advisory Committee, we had a little discussion about cost benefit of agricultural burning. The cost to abate a ton of pollutant or emission from agricultural burning was from $250 per ton to maybe $1,000 to $2,500 per ton, depending on what incentive plans you have, something in that range. We took the time to establish that. Now let's just take a look at the school bus and take a look at the latest, I wish I could hold this up for you, the latest table 6-1. School buses are going to cost us $4 million. And if you actually do the math on the latest table, that is going to save us 11 tons. That is $363,000 per ton of emission reduction. We're not even talking about exposure. So on the one hand, you have these prosaic costs of abatement of $1,000, maybe $500, maybe $2,000 at the most. And we're going to go ahead with a proposal that is going to cost $363,000 per ton. I mean, that is absolute madness.
I do thank you for that comment, Ned, and I do want to acknowledge that I see Jess and Ryan's hand, and they came up after you started speaking, so I want to see if either one of them needed to or wanted to respond to your comment.
I'll take Ryan's leadership and let others speak before Ryan and I speak.
No worries. I just want to make sure that if it was Ned's answer to Ned's comment, we have that. I see Douglas, Taylor, and then the Air District team. So Douglas, go right ahead.
Well, I hope you read some of my comment on the chat thing that, speak English, because I didn't understand interpretation of the abbreviation. But I would like to know, because Ned brought up the buses. I know that we have the Superintendent Ramirez interested in the bus, as well as the San Joaquin Office of Education are interested as well. I believe I talked to Dong about it, and they were supposed to be, talking about the interested involved as well. But the thing is that I don't know if everyone noticed that I think Assembly of Carb Better Foods had already had a program for Stockton for e-bike program, and it can I would like to change the subject because of the bike path, because the bike path is very important for the low emission as far as the car to go to work or go anywhere. The bike path. If anybody is aware of the thing in air quality, what did that do? Did that create infrastructure as far as the bike path or e-bike that I'm concerned about?
If anybody does have that, oh, go ahead.
No, I'm just not sure I understood the question exactly. My apologies.
I think I understand, and maybe this comment that I'm going to say maybe touches a little bit on Ned's comment as well, and that I just want to make sure we're talking about implementing what's in the SERP and what's been adopted and approved by the committee in the SERP. And so to answer Doug's question, I think some of the specifics of what's in that bike infrastructure, which I don't think actually includes e-bikes, but it includes like paths and infrastructure to allow people to safely bike from place to place and make it a more bikeable community. All of that language is in the SERP, and maybe I'll have the team drop just an attachment and just kind of remind folks kind of that language that we used when we were dropping those, moving measures from bucket to bucket. Also, something I just wanted to, as we were moving those measures from bucket to bucket, and with all of the numbers, including the cost-effective numbers, back in September and October, and using all of those, that's how we arrived at the SERP, and including, if you will recall, the school bus measures, the locomotive switchers. Those were, I think there were some debates on those, but ultimately they ended up in the SERP. And so the implementation that Todd is talking about and getting program plans approved is because they're in the SERP, we are moving forward with figuring out how to fund them and get those reductions. And so I just want to clarify, at this point, we're not really talking about what we're going to do, because it's there. That's what the SERP is for. It's just about how we're going to do it with this community and with the input and who we're going to outreach to and how we're going to get the word out there. So.
Great. Thank you. You clarify what I was saying. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Douglas. In order, I see Taylor, and then we'll go to Ryan.
Thanks. Yeah, I have two quick clarifying questions. So when we say that there needs to be a project plan and board approval, I know that the whole SERP is going to Carb for approval in end of July, but there are some things that are pre-approved, so those we can get moving on those before the SERP is approved by Carb. Everything else needs to be approved on the 29th, and then also have a project plan for an individual project approved for each of the measures. Is that right?
That's correct. And now that doesn't mean that we can't get kind of a little bit of a head start on some of these measures and some of these project plans. So, even the ones that are going to require Carb approval, and, considering that we haven't been through the Carb board process yet, we can actually start putting some of the project plan information together, based on what we've done in other communities and what we know is coming, and we can kind of get a head start on that process. We wouldn't submit those officially to Carb until after the Carb board approval of the SERP, but we can, from the district's perspective, we can start gathering information and formulating some of those project plans now. It doesn't necessarily mean that the work isn't going to start until after the Carb board approves it. We just can't do the official submission until that happens.
Got it. And I imagine those are mostly done, this is my second question, in very, very close consultation with the implementation partners. So I'm curious, when will we hear from implementation partners, as I imagine they'll be doing the bulk of the designing of these projects. And does that happen in these subcommittees, or I know as we're approaching like implementation, we're in implementation, right? Like, when do we hear from the people who are carrying out the work?
I think I can
answer that.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, so great question, Taylor, and that starts now. And I know, like we talked about in the subcommittee, and Jessica's working on the document to get out to everybody to talk about who we're going to look to partner with on these. And we have some people, and we've had some communications, but wanting to make sure that we're bringing all the necessary people to work on those. And then it'd be up to the committee whether it's part of a subcommittee, or it's a broad enough topic that everybody has interest in it. Maybe it's just part of the regular steering committee. There's a lot of flexibility when it comes to those things.
Thank you, Ryan. I want to acknowledge two things. Number one, there's a lot of things in the chat, questions and answers, and thank Carb for weighing in on a couple items. I want to queue Ed up because we're almost done with the time allotted for this section, and so I want to give you a heads up to talk about kind of how you want to move the next parts forward. Matt, I see your hand and Ryan's hand as well, so I want to acknowledge you both. And Ryan, do you want to wait for Matt, or do you want to? Are you answering somebody else's question?
Yeah, it got answered. Thank you.
Oh, okay. No worries. So Matt doesn't have a question, so I'll go to Ryan. Do you still was there something else you wanted to cover?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about just the approach and thought process We went through the 15-month process to develop the community emission reduction program, and it really is a multi-pronged approach. And so we're talking about school buses and whether there's benefits, and the information that we provided, that the steering committee asked for, and kind of what was requested or was required by Carb to provide on cost effectiveness, cost benefits. Not all measures are the same, and there's a lot of different things. So when you're looking at school bus measures, there's a reason why it's been approved by Carb as a measure, because of the health benefits from reducing exposure to young children to diesel fumes. And so, when you're looking at a cost benefit analysis, you can't really, look at total mass emissions and compare that to, what the reduced exposure to young people who are most sensitive to those emissions are. And so, when you're looking at the SERP, there's a variety of measures, right? It's not just solely mass. We want to get as much emissions reduced as possible. It kind of goes to what Ned was talking about with also looking at exposure reductions. I mean, we have things like vegetative barriers, we have school air filtration, we have in-home air filtration, which if you're looking at it and emissions that you're getting, reductions that you're getting out of it, that's not where the benefit is. The benefit is looking at who's being going to have reduced exposure to the emissions and what the potential impacts of that are. And so I applaud the steering committee for kind of looking at this as in a totality and saying, okay, we need to take a different approach to improving the quality of life and health of the people in the community, and looking at exposure, and then combining it with measures that get like rail cars and heavy duty diesel truck replacement that get like a lot of emission reductions. And so I think the community emission reduction program that this committee works so hard on, I think it captures that, and it has all these different components. And so I just wanted to make sure that to talk a little bit about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Ryan. So Ed, I know you had your hand up, so you might have a question or a comment, but I'm also going to punt it over to you as our co-host to take us to where you want to go next.
We're real close to needing to move on to standing updates, but I want to open one door that we just cracked open a little bit, and that's subcommittees. As we move this thing forward to develop the plan to get this information to Carb, get it approved, we need the subcommittees functional. And I really would like to see us develop certain, what do we want, disciplines for the subcommittees. A vegetative subcommittee, which is has occurred at other sites. Subcommittees to extrude what we need to get to be able to fund the projects that our SERP has communicated. I also want to, I'm going to use my bully pulpit for a moment. I have a real passion to see young people be successful. Our vocational SERP component for electrical mechanics, while it doesn't directly reduce emissions, it does socioeconomically provide tremendous benefit for our communities. And I can tell you that both Matt Holmes and I have spoken with Sal Vargas, who's the Dean of Career Technical Ed and Workforce Development at Delta College. Sal is extremely excited about working with us, and he has already committed outside of tonight, which actually was my issue why he didn't make it. He'll start coming to our meetings and providing us background information as we move forward. There are some of the items that we have in our SERP that really are time sensitive and really need to be focused on to be useful for us. This isn't for tonight, but I think we need to look at the initially just subcommittees and then get in those subcommittees and determine how and who and what and why and where we need to go to support Todd's work and Ryan's work and Jessica's work. So if there's no major disagreement, I'd like to move on to standing updates.
I do see Jess's hand. I did want to acknowledge that she might have an update on how to move that subcommittee conversation forward. Let me come to Jess briefly, and then to your point, we will head to standing updates. Thank you, Ed.
Yes, and the intention, and I really appreciate all of the discussion we've had. I think the discussion on the charter was very robust, and even just this discussion back and forth, clarifying some of the stuff Todd outlined was great. The intention was, I think, to do exactly what Ed spoke of, and the reason we haven't sent this out is we were hoping to work with the group, but I'm going to give like a 2-second preview of something that will come in your inbox very shortly. But we took some direction from the technical advisory subcommittee that's kind of already met to kind of not reinvent the wheel. So we sort of filled in some of the some technical advice and maybe some of the partners to which Taylor alluded to, and maybe whether or not a subcommittee might be necessary or something that we maybe would suggest be handled in CSC meetings. We are going to send this to you, and you can do with what you want on any of these columns, so that we want to hear from you. We wanted to show you what our suggestions and what we've heard so far, but we're also just open to hearing from the committee. And since we don't have time today, this will be kind of that first major step in designing subcommittees. And then after that, maybe we start to divide up the work among all of us based on the interest to either have a subcommittee or how to move it forward. So that's all I had, and I will go on to standing updates.
Excellent. We have 2 short standing updates on the agenda today. One's on air monitoring and one is from Carb. And so I know they're going to be brief, and I think we've got first the air district on air monitoring, and then we've got a quick Carb update.
All right, thank you, Erica, and good evening, everyone. Good to see you all here tonight. Just very briefly here, as far as the updates, we have reviewed all the sites to identify the location for monitors and infrastructure needs, like electrical. The school district will be getting quotes for approved electricians and to address other infrastructure needs, for example, like getting ladders to access the roofs where we can install the air monitoring equipment. The draft lease we have been able to put together and provide it to the district to review. It's currently with the legal department, and it will need board approval. And lastly here, I just wanted to give a huge thanks to Stockton Unified for their continued support, and especially Gil Rosas, who continues to join us and participate in these meetings and help us out. So thank you so much for that. And just one little item that I just wanted to inform the steering committee is, when we had looked at all of these sites and we had committed we've identified the sites and agreed to those. There's one location for Taylor Elementary. Taylor Elementary and Marshall Elementary are basically 2 elementary schools right next to each other. And after reviewing these schools here, we had mentioned Taylor Elementary, but the roof and the slope on it is going to be quite a bit more difficult putting air monitoring equipment on. And Marshall, it actually will be a better location. So we will be looking to install that at Marshall Elementary. And again, these are basically, if you look at it on a map, they look like it's one school, but it's just split into 2 halves onto that. So I just wanted to make everybody aware of that, in case if you see a different name than the name that we had mentioned before. And that concludes my update.
Thank you, Chai. In the interest of time, I'll allow the questions, but let's go to the Carb update, and then we'll come in and take questions after.
Sure, great. Hi, everybody. This is Scott Wall with the California Air Resources Board. I wanted, I guess, first make sure that the meeting I'm getting ready to talk about, you understand the context of it, because I know it gets a little confusing, all the different meetings that you're being invited to and asked to attend. But at the Air Resources Board, when a emission reduction program is approved by a local air district, before we actually take it to our board, we do a separate public outreach meeting on that emission reduction program. So I think it was Friday afternoon or so, the district actually forwarded out to the entire committee a doodle poll that I put together to get input on what the date of that meeting would be. And just to make sure that you all understand, this is an optional meeting. It's voluntary for you to attend, completely up to you. Currently, the dates that are on the doodle poll are Wednesday, June 17th, Thursday, June 18th, or Monday, June 21st. If you'd prefer to actually email me your preferred date, I will drop my email and the 3 dates that are available in the chat. You're certainly welcome to do that as well. And the deadline for the doodle poll that is in the email from the district is actually tomorrow at noon. So based upon all responses I've received tomorrow at noon, we will then determine what the date of our outreach meeting will be and send a little bit of a save the date email address out to everybody. And I would like to thank, I think hopefully everybody did see the email asking anybody that would like to be involved in the design. I would like to do a special shout out and express appreciation to Catherine, to Jonathan, to Maria, to Matt, and to Sylvia for actually giving us an hour of their time yesterday evening to really give us some great insights and thoughts and ideas on what would make this an effective meeting. So thank you so much for that. And I hope to get a few more responses to the doodle poll this evening or tomorrow by noon. So thank you so much. That's all the update I have.
Thank you, Scott. Margot, I see your hand. Thank you for being patient as we took the Carb update. What's your question or comment?
I had a question for Chai regarding the air monitoring and wondering if there's a timeline with what's going on with the air monitoring, if we're at that point yet.
Yeah, I mean, this one we're trying to get out as soon as possible. So it's a matter of once we've already identified the locations, identified the infrastructure needs. Now we just need to get this through the board to get that approved, and then we can start. Then we can start the process of installing these equipment there. We already have all the equipment, and they've already been set up and ready to go. So once we get approval, we should be able to get it out fairly quickly after that. I would say, since we do have quite a bit of sites, I think we have a total of about 7 sites here. Probably a few months after once we get approval, we should be able to get all these up and running.
You meant school board approval, Chai? Is that what you said?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, the school board, Stockton Unified School Board approval.
Do they go live as soon as they're positioned, or do they all happen at the same time?
Well, we'll be, yeah, whenever they're up, they'll start collecting data immediately. So we won't wait until they're all implemented. As we get them up, we'll get them. We'll start collecting the data and start putting that onto the website so that the committee can start viewing the data and the public.
Thank you, Chai. I see Douglas's hand.
Ty, I need some clarification from you. You said seven schools have been what are the list of the school? Have Victory Elementary was added to that approval as well?
Yes, so we have Victory Elementary, we have Washington Elementary, Hazelton Elementary, Roosevelt Elementary, Taft Elementary, Merlot Institute of Environmental Technology, and also Marshall Elementary.
Okay, all right, Greg. Can you add that to the what we talked about in our in the agenda, that we can still have that documented? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I see no more hands, and we are running a little light on time, so we're going to move into our wrap up. And I want to thank you all. This has been a really, really productive meeting. There's just a couple housekeeping notes before we close out. First things first, we encourage you to be a volunteer, to be a community co-host like Ed today. He was tag teaming on a lot of the agenda items and really providing some thoughts. And we encourage anyone that's on the CSC to to do that. Every month we have a different community co-host, and that's an important role to play. So if there's any of you that would like to volunteer for the next meeting, please raise your Zoom hand now, unmute yourself, or write in the chat so we can keep track and follow back up with you.
Erica, don't say like Ed, because nobody needs to be like me. I appreciate the tolerance that the committee has shown me tonight, and I thank you very much for that. I humbly thank you. So,
all of our co-hosts have done an amazing job, and Ed, we thank you as well. Virtual round of applause for Ed as well. He's done a great job. Thank you. One straggling item from last week's meeting was that the Air District offered to follow up with school bus information about Stockton Unified School District, and that is coming soon from the Air District to the CSC. And then the next meeting of the CSC is Wednesday, July 7th by Zoom. Before we do closing comments, I did want to flag that we do have to check for public comments. And so I'm going to ask for Heather and the larger team to let us know if there are any public members that would like to comment via Zoom, YouTube, or Facebook Live. And I am going to see if I can get any hands. I think Douglas, your hand is up from before, so I'm lowering yours. Let me know if that's incorrect. Great. If there are any members of the public, we welcome you to speak up at this time, or we will also read or track your emails.
We are good.
Any
Thank
public?
You, Erica.
Nope. Okay, great. And I'm checking Facebook, and I'm checking any of the chat comments. We had a fantastic chat discussion today, by the way, and I encourage you to take a look at that, skim through it before you log off, just to make sure you see some of the great answers and questions that have been dropped in. And believe it or not, it's 6:58, and I believe we have met all of the agenda requirements for today. We will stop the screen share, and I will just ask any CSC member or our community co-host or anyone else, if you have any final comments at this time, now's a great chance to weigh in before we adjourn the meeting formally today.
Erica, we were talking about developing a list for the next committee that does the preparation for the next meeting. And that list has been logged out, and we all agree we were gonna, I think, weren't we gonna show it on the screen, or how are we gonna move forward with that?
Do you mean the action items that I was kind of tracking for everyone? Yeah. We didn't have a ton of action items besides, I'm happy to walk through them. I took notes that mostly were around the charter discussion. There were lots of comments about CERT prioritization, and specifically in the context of the health studies and the interest in moving that forward. And so those notes will be reflected, and the chat's really great for that documentation. We didn't get to talk about subcommittees, but the action items that we will have, there's two things that I saw. One is that the Air District's going to share the working document that they already began regarding subcommittees and the next steps for those. So you're going to see that in your inbox sometime very soon. And you will all, as CSC members, have the opportunity to design the structure and the topics for those subcommittees. So the TAG is one, or the Technical Advisory Council or committee is one. And then there may be others, certainly, maybe it's workforce, right? There's been a lot of interest in the chat around workforce development. Maybe there's some opportunities there. The CSC should also share your preferred dates and times for the Carb public outreach meeting by tomorrow at noon. And Scott was gracious enough to put his contact information in that chat. So take a look at that. And if you have your preferred times for that public outreach meeting, we do hope that you will reach out to Carb and make sure that they know that. I am going to share my screen so you can see this. And then 1 second, let me just make it bigger. And then I will share it for you all. And if there's anything that wasn't reflected, I'll stay on a little longer and add it to that so that you can all see it and make sure that you're keeping me honest, right? Hold on 1 sec.
Okay, while you're doing that, Scott, the original email on that meeting, it went out under what email address? Because I looked up my Scott Wall emails and I didn't see anything on it.
Yeah, Ed, so what we've been doing is we've actually been sending all of our communication out through the district. So it actually came from the AB 617 district message, just to ensure that we are actually getting it out to all current members.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarification.
Excellent. Well, for those of you that are can see the screen, I'm sharing my screen. I tried to zoom in. Do me a favor and don't judge, because it's not pretty, but it is. It does reflect some of our conversation today. Again, if there's anything that's not reflected accurately or that I should add in here, feel free to drop that in the chat and I'll drop it in, and we'll make sure that's included in the notes that are sent to the Air District. We did recap the charter discussion. We did recap a little bit of the SERP prioritization, and there's lots in the chat that I couldn't copy over. We didn't really talk about subcommittees, but there are some action items related to that. And then we didn't have a huge parking lot today, so I think the health study conversation kind of goes in that category as well, and I did want to acknowledge that. It was referenced a couple different places, but I went ahead and dropped it in the SERP prioritization because it seemed like that might be the most appropriate place. So I'll leave this up for 4 seconds before I stop share. And if you have an edit, like I said, drop it in the chat. I'll add it to this before we adjourn. Well, after we adjourn, but before I send. Anything else for the good of the group before we turn it over to Ed and Ryan to close us out? Seeing nothing, I will hand it over to our community co-host and our Air District host.
Ryan, you're up.
Well, just want to thank everybody. Good discussions on the various topics, and we'll do our best to take those action items and put them to paper and get that back to everybody. Thanks.
Perfect. And I'm so pleased to be a part of a group that can have the diverse opinions that we have and be able to work together respectfully. And I want to thank everyone for that. So thank you, and have a great night.
You're here. Have a great night. Meeting adjourned.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.